All right, Rob Pincus here. As I promised last week, I want to talk a lot about AR pistols right now. So this is a CMMG Mark IV AR pistol with a shockwave blade stabilization device. Now, a lot of talk about AR pistols over the last few years, but my experience with AR pistols actually goes back a couple of decades. So going all the way back to the assault weapons ban days, built my first AR pistol in the 90s. And you couldn't have a muzzle brake or flash hider or any of that kind of stuff going on, and the kits weren't very reliable, and it was really just a novelty. So looked into it, thought it was kind of interesting. At the back of the buffer tube had a sling swivel, put a bungee cord type sling on it. The idea, punch the gun out against yourself, kind of like an MP5K has that sling swivel on the back of it. The small folding stock one, you take the folding stock off, you can put a sling swivel on the back, same thing. It kind of hangs, dangles, push out against either a leather, nylon strap, or something like a bungee. Interesting, but again, a novelty. Took another hard look at them again in the mid-2000s, doing a lot of executive protection training, had done a lot of executive protection work. Of course, all the high-risk contractor stuff was starting up. We were doing a lot of that type of training at Valhalla Training Center, worked with ESI for a while, and the Bushmaster Carbon 15 pistol, I think it was, which didn't have a buffer tube set up. It had a recoil system that worked up over the top of the barrel. And that system, again, had no cover on the pistol barrel itself, so it was definitely something where you'd have to keep your hand back if you're going to put two hands on it. You didn't want to be out here on that hot barrel. I think it did have a muzzle brake on it. Did an evaluation actually for SWAT magazine in the mid-2000s while I was out at Valhalla with that. And while it was definitely interesting and definitely offered an interesting amount of firepower with the 30-round magazine, kept under a jacket, you could actually conceal it, let it hang off of a shoulder strap type thing, again, pushing out against that strap for stability. But it wasn't really until maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, obviously when the SIG brace came out, SB Tactical had their stabilization device, a couple other stabilizing devices came out for AR pistols that really the community started talking about them a lot. And obviously the idea was, we've come to understand the advantage of a short-barreled rifle, and the idea was that with a pistol configuration and a stabilizing brace, which can be pressed up against the body and maybe even pressed up against the face for essentially a shouldering effect, giving you the 4 points of contact that you would want out of a long gun, the pistol becomes much more interesting, and the AR pistol particularly. Right now I've got a little 10-round magazine thrown in there. Of course, we throw a traditional AR magazine in there, and all of a sudden this starts looking a lot like an AR rifle and can be used potentially like a rifle as well, although if that's your intent, there's still a very gray area of the law here because of the NFA. The NFA says you can't have a stock on a rifle that has a barrel, you can't have a stock on a pistol, and if you want a stocked rifle, long gun, that has a barrel less than 16 inches in length, then you have to fill out special paperwork, pay $200 tax, and basically have that firearm treated very differently than a traditional firearm. AR pistols are treated just like any other pistol, including in states where you can't have a short-barreled rifle, a restricted NFA item, but you can have a pistol. Now this particular one is a CMMG. This is the Mark IV. This is a 12.5-inch barrel, which is obviously relatively long for an AR pistol. They do that for liability. They want to ensure that they're still getting enough gas back through this tube. And they believe this is the most reliable configuration for an AR pistol. Of course, I own several AR pistols, including several that have a shorter barrel length than this one. Now, if you're interested in having an AR pistol with a stabilization brace, of course, the idea here is for people that only have the use of one arm. Right now, I'm sort of getting a little leverage from this stabilization brace back against the inside of my arm. And that makes this more stable than it would be if I were just trying to hold this without the brace, and I could get much more horizontal movement in the gun. So this helps me manage recoil. Now in this particular case, I've got a laser and a light module mounted on the end of the AR pistol. I was out at the range with this gun a few days ago after a class and found that this particular stabilizing brace, one-handed with the laser, definitely made this easier to shoot than a traditional AR pistol one-handed with a laser would be, because this helps manage recoil. So there's less deviation under recoil, and that's really the main problem. Even if you think about like hip shooting this or holding it out in front of your body, kind of in front of your body under your line of sight, with a laser in particular, your first shot you can be very, very accurate with, but this isn't a good way to manage recoil. It's not horrible, especially if you put that sling on it, you push out against it. The AR pistol, if you like the idea of it, has a place. But there's no doubt that if you were to shoulder it and then put this gun up on your face, attach it to your body and put it up on your face, shoulder it like a rifle, you're going to have even more stability. You're going to have a much easier time using the iron sights of any kind, and certainly any kind of a red dot sight like this hollow sun on there. So What's the advantage of the AR pistol? Well, here's the thing. A few years ago, when this was very, very popular and something a lot of people were talking about because of the SIG brace primarily, which again looks a lot like a stock, acts a lot like a stock, could be used a lot like a stock, the ATF, BATFE officially decided that no, if you put that device or any of the stabilizing devices on your AR pistol, and to a certain extent, if you put any kind of a padded area on the buffer tube, anything you would do, which would seem like your intention was to then shoulder the gun and fire it like a rifle, de facto created an SBR, and that you would potentially be in a felonious violation of NFA. And similarly, what they've said now recently is, okay, we're no longer going to say that. It is not de facto a crime to own this gun and incidentally put it up against your body or put your face on it and shoot it in a shoulder position, kind of like a rifle. Now, some people are interpreting this latest letter to only apply to the SB tactical version of the stabilizer. Other people are saying, no, if you read the paragraph that actually describes what they're talking about, they're saying any stabilization brace, if it's not modified and if it's put on with the intent of using it like it's actually designed to be used, that you are not creating something that even if you do incidentally shoulder it, it should be judged as an attempt to circumvent the NFA. Now, that's not going to stop a lot of people, of course, from putting these on their guns and trying to circumvent the NFA, simply avoiding the $200 tax stamp. Why would you want to do that? Well, you wouldn't want to obviously go out and do something to violate the law intentionally, but what's the advantage? Well, the advantage is overall length. If we have a very short gun that is still reliable with a 223-556 round, and it allows us to use a shorter gun inside of the close quarters in a home defense scenario, then that's an advantage. If you want to do stage one of these, let's say you're a patrol officer that has to supply your own rifle. The agency isn't going to own the rifle, so it's still a hassle for you to go through the NFA SBR rules. It's still something that maybe in your state you're not allowed to do if the agency doesn't own the gun, but you are allowed to put your own long gun in the car that you patrol with. It's a lot easier to move a short rifle or a pistol with a stabilization brace inside of a vehicle. It's a lot easier to move around inside of a house with it. Now, primarily, we recommend using a pistol for home defense, especially if you're going to be moving. If you're going to be moving around to secure your kids or to go check on the kids, or you're going to bring the kids back to the safe room, the barricade area, whatever you have, it probably makes more sense for most people to move around that house with a pistol in one hand, and a good flashlight in the other, right? Keep a separate flashlight in the other hand. That way we're not using the gun to sort of search for the kids, right? Now, if I have this in my hands, whether I'm, intending to use this from the shoulder or not, and I use this light, it's very tempting to start pushing this light up and start searching the house this way. And of course, now I've turned this firearm into a flashlight, and I don't want to do that. So we prefer to use a separate handheld light, even if I am using an AR pistol, short-barreled rifle, full-length carbine for home defense, shotgun for home defense. Handheld light is still the way to go. So if you're moving around your house and you've got that holstered pistol especially, right? So I keep the battle belt, I throw the battle belt on, I've got my pistol in a holster, I put my hand on that, I'm using the flashlight. Overwhelmingly, we know that when something goes bump in the night, it's not an intruder that needs to be shot, and we know there's a tragedy, not every month, but it sure seems like far too often we see people shooting people that don't need to be shot. We just had a father who killed his 22-year-old daughter in Ohio, just about a week and a half ago, trying to search his house to see what was going on when he thought his daughter was staying somewhere else, and it turns out it was her moving through the house. These kinds of tragedies, I think, can be removed from the equation if we take more steps to get between ourselves and the firing of the gun. Obviously not walking around with your finger on the trigger, not walking around pointing the gun around in a shooting position. Well, with a long gun, it's much harder to get further removed. With a pistol that you essentially are going to carry around like a long gun with two hands on it, it's harder to get further removed from that very easy process of coming up, taking the safety off, and shooting. If this gun happens to be on your chest and you come up here and take that safety off and start shooting again, it's very hard to get far removed from that process. So a long gun on a sling or an AR pistol on a sling, sure, maybe that's going to be an option for you. I like to see the larger guns, the heavier guns, the guns that require two hands for use, be staged in your barricade area once you are static. So in other words, once you've got the kids, you've got the family behind you, the door's locked, you're on the phone with the police, that's a great time to take the long gun or the AR pistol that's going to be used more like a long gun as your primary tool. So a little bit of a tangent there on the tactics of when you might employ the AR pistol inside your home, and again, maybe a lot easier to move around inside of a vehicle if you were in some kind of a situation where you had you wanted that extra firepower, you wanted that 5.56 or 2.23 round. Now, AR pistols in general, Again, like I said, when we first started looking at these, and I first started looking at these 2 decades ago, not the most reliable things in the world. Today, there are many different reliable configurations. I own several AR pistols. Some have stabilization braces, some don't. Some are actually used in a staging capacity for home defense, and others are just kind of novelties and fun to have in the collection, and they're enjoyable to go out and shoot. If you choose to have an AR pistol in a defensive context, I think it's important to understand the legality, right? First of all, it's a pistol. It should be primarily thought of as a pistol, and the stabilization braces do definitely help you shoot them like a pistol, especially if you're going to put a laser on them like I have on this one. All right, that stabilization here means that I can get those follow-up shots faster. First shot's not going to be a problem, but this is all about follow-up shots and managing recoil, especially laterally. The SIG brace, which attaches to the arm a little bit differently, sort of changes the angle at which you can point the gun. If you're not blading out radically, it can be much more difficult to use the gun because you lose this wrist mobility that you gain with these blade type braces, right? Theoretically, I could even come out here to the outside of my arm if I were moving around in the house on a corner or something like that, and get a lot of leverage against the arm that way. Of course, it's designed to be used this way. Now, modifying these, making these something more stock-like, not something you want to do. The SIG brace has a strap, for example. Even removing that strap from the equation, even if you were to just want to remove the strap because it's easier to get your arm in and out of the center of that stabilization brace, that would be considered a modification that violates the latest BATFE rules, the last letter that's come out. So you want to watch out there. There's a lot of gray areas here. Now we taped a training DVD on the use of AR pistols, the defensive use of AR pistols several years ago at Personal Defense Network. I worked with Steve Arian, and we came up with a DVD that I thought was pretty comprehensive. It talked about sighting options, lasers, optics, iron sights, things like that. Talked about shooting it off the slings, talked about shooting it off of your face, talked about shooting it off your body, because at the time, we all were under the impression that the ATF was saying, no, don't worry about it. If you want to shoulder them, we don't really care. It's fine, it doesn't construct an SBR. Then, of course, a few months later, they said, no, it does. And as soon as they said that, we decided not to ship that DVD. It happened just about a couple weeks before we were getting ready to ship it. So we had thousands of these DVDs in a warehouse for the last few years that haven't seen the light of day. As of the letter that was written in April and released in May, just before the NRA annual meeting, 2017, we've decided to go ahead and release those DVDs for people who are interested in learning more about AR pistols. And again, it's not all about treating an AR pistol like a short-barreled rifle. A lot of it is information specific to an AR pistol. If this is something you're interested in, understand that the letter as it's written says it's okay to shoulder incidentally, but it's not okay to put the stabilization brace on there with the only intention of being using this as a shoulder stock or using it as an improvised shoulder stock for a pistol that's going to be used like a short-barreled rifle. At least that's the way I read it. Now, I'm not a lawyer. There are a lot of different opinions out there on the internet, but my opinion is if you have one of these, any of the types of braces, you want to train with it to be used the way it is to be used, and also realize that there may be moments where incidental to the context of that moment, the extra deviation control or the body position that you end up in, pushing this against your body, bringing it up to your face and taking that shot, doesn't instantly make you a felon the way I read that current letter from the BATFE. What's more important here is that we think about how that letter then relates to the rest of the NFA and the whole rules about short-barreled rifles. I think that what it points out, and what really has been pointed out more than anything else through the controversy over AR pistols, stabilization braces, and shouldering them in a shooting position that looks like a rifle position, is the inanity of the NFA. The National Firearms Act is a relic from a time past when maybe people were worried about concealing something that was a significantly more powerful firearm. Maybe people were worried about deviation control and putting the bullets where they needed to be from a criminal intent standpoint, and the government wanted to make that harder. Today, in today's world, we see a $200 tax stamp being placed on something that really isn't that much different than something that the ATF, the federal government, is now saying you can legally own without a tax stamp. If you looked at this, we go so many of these issues are dealt with superficially, emotionally. Well, if you look at this device that the government says, nope, don't worry about that, you're fine, and you look at its capabilities, you compare them to the capabilities, compare this firearm's capabilities to the capabilities of a true SBR, there isn't that significant of a difference. And a few years ago, people were saying, oh, don't say that. If you say that, the ATF's going to ban these things or make it harder to own them, and then the secret's going to be out. Well, I never really bought into the idea that it was a secret, that the ATF didn't realize what was going to happen the minute they approved the SB tactical brake or the SIG or the brace or the SIG brace and allowed those to be sold. I think it was pretty obvious what was going to happen. Now, to some extent, that could have been the trick, right? That was the trap. Well, let's get these out there, and then as soon as people start shouldering them, we're going to make them felons, and then they can't own guns anymore. And this is how we start confiscation. This is how we start removing people from the list of people eligible to legally own guns. And that clearly hasn't been the case, right? That was not the case. What was the case, I think, was that they really hadn't thought it through. There was a wave of discussion all over the internet, all over the firearms community about whether or not it was legal to let this touch your body while you were shooting, and how you defined construction and how you defined intent, and whether or not a handgun, there's so many handguns out there, the Desert Eagle, there's a lot of big revolvers out there that certainly aren't intended to be fired one-handed. They're capable of being fired one-handed, but the idea that the way we define things has to do with barrel length, or the way we define things has to do with whether or not you can put a second hand on the gun up front without burning yourself, or the way we define things has to do with cosmetic features. That's the silliness. So I hope that the re-legalization of using these from the shoulder, incidental to certain contexts of firing an AR pistol, opens up that conversation and continues the conversation as all over the firearms world right now anyway about repealing the NFA. Personally, I obviously think that the Gun Control Act and the NFA, the parts that do infringe upon our rights, should be removed. I'm in favor of constitutional carry. I like the idea of shall not be infringed, with the obvious asterisk that any of our rights can be taken away if we prove to be bad actors on the social contract, right? We can deprive people of their freedom. We can even deprive people of their life if they're judged criminally, irredeemable, I guess. We put them away for life, or we even have the death penalty as an option here in the United States of America. So the idea that people forget that, and it's, oh no, everyone can have a gun all the time, government can never take that away. Well, we take away people's right to free speech, we take away people's freedom, we take away people's right to private property, we take away people's lives when we institute the death penalty. Certainly there are people who are violent criminals, people who are mentally adjudicated not to be capable of handling the responsibility, who will have their Second Amendment rights taken away. But if you haven't had those rights taken away, then these petty infringements over barrel length and whether a gun looks like a gun or looks like a briefcase, or whatever it may be, those are what we want to see gotten rid of. Obviously, the Hearing Protection Act, suppressors, things like that, all play into this same conversation. Because you give me a 7 to 10 inch AR pistol with a short stabilization brace that can be used like a stock, and you put a suppressor on it, and I think you've got a really good home defense tool for a lot of people. Maybe you make it pistol caliber for some people, and now you have interchangeable magazines between that and your pistol, and you can have this as your static point defense in your barricade area. You can have your AR or your pistol that uses the same magazines as your AR pistol as your primary sidearm, in case you have to go get the kids or bring the kids to a safe area, move yourself to a safe area. You don't have to run around with that long gun pretending to be the SWAT guy. So that's just kind of a quick summary data dump on how I feel about AR pistols in general. Again, I appreciate CMMG sending me this one out to play with that at the range. They're, of course, a 2017 PDN Tour sponsor. I imagine you'll be seeing more discussion about this, obviously, in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about the AR pistols, whether you think it's just a novelty, whether they're a fad, whether it's much ado about nothing, or whether this really is a big deal for people interested in a more compact way to get the benefits of an AR as a home defense tool.